October 14th, 1976, 2:17 p.m. Central Park, New York City. Near the Alice in Wonderland statue, John Lennon sits on a bench, watching his one-year-old son Sean toddle across the grass, chasing pigeons that scatter and regroup with mechanical precision. The afternoon sun filters through autumn leaves, creating patterns of light and shadow that shift as the wind moves through the trees. For 18 months, John has been living a deliberately quiet life, trading his role as a public figure for the simple pleasure of being a father, a husband, a man who can walk through Central Park without being followed by cameras or crowds or the constant weight of expectation. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe, comment, and like it. But today feels different. Today, the shadows seem to contain watchers. The casual park visitors appear to be studying him too carefully. The normal rhythms of New York life feel disrupted by something he cannot name, but can sense with the hypervigilance that comes from years of being monitored, analyzed, and targeted. Sean stumbles, rights himself, continues his unsteady pursuit of the pigeons. John watches his son with the fierce protectiveness that has defined his life since retreating from the music industry, since choosing family over fame, since deciding that raising Sean matters more than making albums that might never be heard by the boy whose childhood he refused to miss the way he missed Julian's. A man approaches the bench, elderly, perhaps 70, wearing a worn gray coat and carrying a newspaper folded under his arm. He moves slowly, deliberately, like someone who's been walking through this park for decades, who knows every path and pond and playground. But his eyes are alert, focused, scanning the area with the careful attention of someone whose presence here is not coincidental. "Excuse me," the man says, his voice carrying a slight accent that might be European, might be something else disguised as sound European. "You are John Lennon, are you not?" John's body tenses automatically. He has developed reflexes over the years, ways of deflecting unwanted attention, of protecting his privacy without being rude to people who simply recognize him from magazines or television. But something about this man's tone suggests this is not a casual encounter, not a fan seeking an autograph or a conversation about music. "I'm just here with my son," John replies carefully, not confirming or denying his identity, keeping his options open. The man sits on the other end of the bench, uninvited but not aggressive, maintaining enough distance to seem respectful while positioning himself to continue the conversation. He unfolds his newspaper, pretends to read, but his attention remains focused on John, on Sean, on the security implications of this meeting. "I've been paid to kill you," the man says quietly, his voice carrying no emotion, no threat, simply stating a fact like commenting on the weather or the changing season. John's blood goes cold. His hands grip the edge of the bench, every muscle in his body preparing for fight or flight, his mind calculating distances to Sean, escape routes through the park, options for protecting his son for whatever this conversation is about to become. "But I cannot do it," the man continues, still staring at his newspaper, still speaking in the same conversational tone. "I have been watching you for 6 months, studying your routines, your vulnerabilities, your moments of greatest exposure, learning when you are alone, when you are with your family, when you could be eliminated with minimal risk of witnesses or complications." John looks around the park, suddenly seeing every casual visitor as a potential threat, every jogger as possible backup, every parent pushing a stroller as potential cover for surveillance equipment. The peaceful afternoon has transformed into a tactical situation where his child's safety depends on decisions he makes in the next few minutes. "Who paid you?" John asks, his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "People who consider your potential return to music a national security concern," the man replies. "People who remember your influence during the anti-war movement, who are concerned about your political activities if you choose to resume your public career." Sean has wandered closer to the pond, is reaching toward the water with the fearless curiosity of a child who has not yet learned that the world contains dangers beyond scraped knees and disappointed expectations. John stands slowly, casually, moving toward his son while maintaining the appearance of relaxed supervision rather than urgent protection. "Why are you telling me this?" John asks, scooping Sean into his arms, holding him close enough to feel the child's heartbeat against his chest, the simple rhythm that has become the most important sound in it. Because you are not who I expected, the man says, folding his newspaper, standing as if preparing to leave. 6 months ago, when I accepted this assignment, I believed I would be eliminating a political agitator, someone whose death would prevent future damage to American interests. The man walks closer, stopping just close enough for John to see the details of his face. Weathered skin, pale blue eyes, hands that show the careful control of someone trained in violence, but choosing restraint. This is not an amateur, not a disturbed fan or political extremist, but a professional who kills for money and has been hired to end John Lennon's life. But watching you these months, seeing you with your child, observing your daily life, I understand that you have already eliminated yourself as a political threat. You have chosen family over activism, privacy over influence, personal happiness over public engagement. John shifts Sean to his other arm, the child babbling contentedly, unaware that his father is receiving a death sentence and a reprieve in the same conversation. Around them, Central Park continues its normal afternoon rhythms. Children playing, couples walking, tourists photographing the Alice statue. Life proceeding as if nothing has changed, as if John's world has not just shifted into a new reality where his continued existence depends on remaining invisible, irrelevant, politically neutered. So, you're not going to kill me. I'm not going to kill you, the man confirms. But you should understand that others will be sent. People who may not spend 6 months observing your character, who may not care whether your current life poses any actual threat to government interests. The man begins walking away, then pauses, turns back to face John directly. There are forces that consider your very existence destabilizing, regardless of your current activities. Your influence on young people during the 1960s created long-term concerns about your potential to inspire future resistance to authority. Some believe that eliminating you would send a message to other artists who might consider using their platforms for political purposes. John feels Sean's small hand touching his face, the innocent gesture grounding him in the immediate reality of fatherhood, while his mind processes the larger implications of this conversation. He has spent 18 months believing that retreat from public life would provide safety, that choosing silence over speech would protect his family from the consequences of his previous activism. How many others? John asks. I do not know the full scope of the operation, but I know that multiple approaches are being considered. Some favor the direct elimination I was hired to perform. Others prefer psychological pressure designed to ensure your permanent withdrawal from political activity. Still others believe that continuing surveillance and occasional reminders of your vulnerability will be sufficient to maintain your compliance. The man reaches into his coat, removes a small envelope, holds it out toward John. This contains information about some of the people who are monitoring you, some of the methods being used, some of the decisions being made about your future. Consider it professional courtesy from someone who respects your choice to prioritize your child over your political convictions. John takes the envelope, weighs it in his hand, feels the thickness that suggests photographs, documents, evidence of the machinery that has been tracking his daily life while he believed he was living in peaceful anonymity. Why give me this? Because you deserve to understand the nature of the forces arrayed against you. Because making informed decisions about your family's safety requires accurate information about the threats you face. Sean begins fussing, hungry for his afternoon snack, ready to return home to the familiar comforts of his nursery, his toys, his mother's voice reading stories that end with everyone safe and happy. John bounces him gently, maintaining the appearance of a normal father dealing with normal childcare, while absorbing information that redefines everything he thought he knew about his current life. What happens now? Now you continue living quietly. You avoid political statements, political associations, political funding. You remain John Lennon, the private citizen, rather than John Lennon, the cultural influence. You accept that your voice, however powerful it might be, is not worth the risk to your child's safety. The man walks away, disappearing into the crowd of park visitors, becoming indistinguishable from the dozens of other elderly New Yorkers who spend their afternoons feeding pigeons and reading newspapers on benches. But his warning remains, hanging in the autumn air like smoke from a distant fire, evidence of dangers that cannot be seen, but can destroy everything John has built during his months of deliberate invisibility. John carries Sean toward the park exit, his mind racing through the implications of what he has learned. The envelope in his pocket feels heavy, weighted with revelations he is not sure he wants to discover, evidence of surveillance operations he has suspected but not confirmed, proof that his retreat from public life has been monitored as carefully as his previous activism. At the corner of 72nd Street and Central Park West, John stops, looks back at the park where he has spent countless peaceful afternoons with Sean, where he believed they were safe from the pressures that defined his previous life. Now he knows that every visit has been documented, every routine mapped, every moment of vulnerability cataloged by people who view his happiness as a potential security threat. The Dakota building rises before him, the Gothic fortress where he and Yoko have built their quiet life, where Sean takes his first steps and speaks his first words, where John has spent 18 months learning to be a father instead of a symbol. But now the building feels different, less like a refuge and more like a target, less like a home and more like a place under siege by forces he cannot see but cannot escape. That evening, after Sean is asleep and Yoko is working in her studio, John sits in his study and opens the envelope the assassin gave. Inside, he finds photographs of himself taken with telephoto lenses, walking with Sean in Central Park, buying groceries on Columbus Avenue, entering recording studios where he has been working on private musical projects he believed were secret. The photographs are accompanied by typed reports detailing his daily routines, his contacts, his financial transactions, his conversations with lawyers and accountants and friends. Every aspect of his private life has been monitored, analyzed, reported to people who maintain files on his emotional state, his political potential, his capacity for returning to the kind of activism that made him a target. One document particularly disturbs him, a psychological evaluation concluding that his retreat from public life is temporary and tactical rather than permanent and genuine. The analysis suggests that John is building psychological and financial resources for eventual return to political activity and recommends continued monitoring with readiness to escalate intervention if subject resumes public political engagement. John understands the message. His silence is interpreted as strategy rather than sincerity, his privacy viewed as preparation for future resistance rather than genuine withdrawal from political life. No matter how quiet he remains, no matter how completely he avoids political statements or activities, he will continue to be seen as a dormant threat requiring active management. Another document details Operation Songbird, a comprehensive surveillance program targeting musicians whose previous political activities require ongoing monitoring. John's name appears on a list that includes Bob Dylan, Joan Baez, Country Joe McDonald, and other artists whose anti-war songs influenced public opinion during the Vietnam era. The document reveals that all of these musicians face similar surveillance, similar pressure, similar consequences for any attempt to resume political activity. The scope of the operation staggers him. This is not personal persecution, but institutional policy, a systematic program designed to neutralize the political potential of cultural figures who demonstrated the capacity to influence public opinion through artistic expression. John's individual situation is part of a larger strategy for preventing artistic dissent, for transforming creative platforms into mechanisms of social control rather than social change. The final document is a decision matrix outlining various intervention scenarios based on John's future behavior. Continued political silence results in maintenance-level surveillance. Any attempt to resume anti-war activism triggers escalated pressure tactics, including financial disruption, legal harassment, and personal safety concerns. Return to public political advocacy results in permanent resolution through direct action. John understands the euphemisms. Direct action means assassination. The elderly man in Central Park was not an isolated contract killer, but part of a systematic program for eliminating cultural figures who refuse to accept their assigned role as entertainers rather than political influences. As midnight approaches, John sits in his study, surrounded by evidence of the forces that control his life, the invisible machinery that has been tracking his every movement while he believed he was living in freedom. He thinks about Sean, sleeping safely in his nursery, protected by his father's decision to choose silence over speech, privacy over influence, family over politics. But now John knows that protection is conditional, temporary, dependent on his continued compliance with expectations that he remain politically neutered for the rest of his life. He knows that any attempt to resume his role as a cultural voice will trigger consequences that extend beyond his own safety to threaten the family he has prioritized over everything else. He burns the documents in his fireplace, watching the evidence of his surveillance dissolve into smoke and ash. But the knowledge remains, the understanding that his life has been permanently redefined by forces beyond his control, that his choices have been reduced to compliance or elimination, that his voice has been classified as a weapon too dangerous to be deployed again. John Lennon will spend the next 4 years of his life living with the knowledge that multiple people have been hired to kill him, that his continued existence depends on his political silence, that his love for his son has become both his greatest joy and his most profound vulnerability. He will make music again, but carefully, avoiding political content, steering clear of messages that might be interpreted as calls for resistance or change. Because he has learned that some prices are too high to pay, some fights too dangerous to continue, some victories too costly to pursue. The elderly assassin in Central Park has shown him the true cost of political courage, and John has decided that Sean's safety matters more than his own integrity, that his child's future is worth more than his artistic freedom. That love sometimes requires the sacrifice of everything that made life meaningful before love existed. The man who once sang about imagining a world without war will spend his remaining years imagining a world where his voice cannot be heard, where his influence cannot reach beyond the walls of his home, where his power has been reduced to the simple act of keeping his family safe by keeping himself silent. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave a comment with your thoughts on the video. I always enjoy reading your feedback.